The stagecoach rattled to a stop in a cloud of dust, as Emma Evans clutched her small leather-bound journal to her chest, her heart thundering with anticipation. After 6 weeks of travel from Philadelphia to this remote corner of Nebraska Territory, she had finally arrived in Red Cloud. The year was 1867, and the West was still wild, dangerous, and full of promise. At least that's what the letters from her soon-to-be husband had promised. Red Cloud. Last stop, the driver called out, his voice rough from trail dust and tobacco. Emma gathered her skirts and stepped carefully down from the coach, wincing as her feet touched solid ground after so many days of constant motion. Her 2 trunks containing everything she owned in the world were unceremoniously dropped beside her. "Miss, you need assistance?" the driver asked, already climbing back to his perch. "No, thank you. My fiancé should be waiting for me," Emma replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite her nerves. At 22, she had made the bold decision to answer an advertisement for a mail-order bride placed by a cattle rancher named Harold Jenkins. After months of correspondence, she had agreed to marry him and left everything behind in Philadelphia. Emma brushed dust from her navy traveling dress and adjusted her bonnet, trying to make herself presentable after the long journey. She scanned the small, dusty main street of Red Cloud with growing concern. The town was smaller than she had imagined, a single dirt road lined with a general store, a saloon, what appeared to be a blacksmith shop, and a handful of other wooden buildings. A few townsfolk moved about their business, occasionally casting curious glances her way. But there was no sign of Harold Jenkins. Emma waited patiently for an hour beside her trunks, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. Her stomach tightened with growing worry. Perhaps he was delayed by ranch business. Perhaps he had misunderstood when she would arrive. After another hour passed, Emma finally approached the general store, the only place that seemed welcoming enough to inquire about her situation. A bell jingled as she pushed open the door. "Afternoon, miss." An elderly man with spectacles greeted her from behind a cluttered counter. "New to Red Cloud, I take it?" "Yes, I'm Emma Evans. I've come from Philadelphia to marry Harold Jenkins. Do you know him? He was supposed to meet me at the stagecoach." The shopkeeper's face fell instantly. "Oh, my dear girl, I'm afraid I have some terrible news." Emma felt the blood drain from her face. "What is it?" "Harold Jenkins died 3 weeks ago. Caught a fever that swept through these parts. It took him and 2 others in town." The shopkeeper removed his spectacles, polishing them nervously on his apron. "I'm mighty sorry, miss. Nobody thought to send word east. Things happen quick out here." Emma swayed slightly, gripping the edge of the counter to steady herself. "I see," she managed to say, though her mind was reeling. Dead. The man she had traveled nearly 2,000 miles to marry was dead. And she was alone in a strange town with barely enough money to last a month. "You have someplace to go back east?" the shopkeeper asked kindly. Emma shook her head. "No, I sold everything to come here." The shopkeeper, who introduced himself as Mr. Paulson, offered her temporary lodging above the store until she could decide what to do. Emma accepted numbly. Her carefully planned future suddenly dissolved into uncertainty. That evening, after Mr. Paulson had helped her carry her trunks upstairs to a small but clean room, Emma sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed her tears to fall. She was not necessarily crying for Harold Jenkins, a man she had never met in person, but for herself, for her dashed hopes, for the security she thought she was traveling toward. The next morning, Emma rose early, washed her face in the basin provided, and put on her best day dress, a modest blue cotton with white trim. If she was to find work in Red Cloud, she needed to present herself well. Perhaps there was a school that needed a teacher, or a family that required a governess. She had some education, after all. As Emma descended the stairs to the store, she overheard Mr. Paulson speaking to someone in hushed tones. "Poor girl came all this way to marry Jenkins, only to find him gone," Mr. Paulson was saying. "Jenkins," a deep voice responded. "The rancher who passed in the fever outbreak, the very same. She arrived yesterday, mail order bride with nowhere to go now." Emma paused at the foot of the stairs, not wanting to interrupt. Through the crack in the door, she could see Mr. Paulson speaking with a tall man whose face was obscured, though she could make out broad shoulders under a worn leather vest and a cowboy hat held respectfully in his hands. "That's a damned shame," the man said, his voice carrying a note of genuine concern. "Where is she now?" "Upstairs. Gave her the spare room until she figures things out. Though what a young Eastern lady can do out here alone, I don't rightly know." Emma took a deep breath and pushed open the door, deciding it was better to face the conversation directly than to eavesdrop. Both men turned toward her, and for the first time, she saw the stranger clearly. He was taller than she had first thought, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. A few days' worth of beard shadowed his jaw, and his dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar. He was not conventionally handsome, perhaps, but there was something striking in the weathered planes of his face. "Miss Evans," Mr. Paulson said, recovering quickly. "This is Ryan Lawson. He owns the Double L Ranch about 10 miles outside of town." Ryan Lawson studied her with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. Then, unexpectedly, a slow smile transformed his features. "Miss Evans," he said, extending his hand. "Seems like you've been waiting for me." Emma blinked in confusion. "I beg your pardon," Ryan's smile faltered slightly. "I mean, it appears that fate has brought you to Red Cloud for a reason, though not the one you expected." "I don't understand," Emma replied, her brow furrowing. "I've been looking for a schoolteacher for the children at my ranch and the neighboring homesteads," Ryan explained. "We've got 7 young ones with no formal education. I was just telling Mr. Paulson here that I'd posted an advertisement back east, but hadn't received any responses." He paused, studying her face. "You have any experience teaching, Miss Evans?" The question caught Emma by surprise. She had indeed taught Sunday school in Philadelphia and had occasionally helped younger students with their lessons when she was completing her own education. Yes, some, though I'm not formally trained." Ryan nodded as if this confirmed something for him. "Would you consider the position?" "Room and board at the ranch plus a small salary. The children need someone with Eastern education, and you need, well, a purpose, I imagine." Emma hesitated, taken aback by the directness of his offer. She had just arrived in Red Cloud, was still reeling from discovering her intended husband was dead, and now this stranger was offering her employment at his isolated ranch. "It's a respectable situation," Mr. Paulson added quickly, sensing her hesitation. "The Lawson Ranch is one of the most successful in the county. Ryan's sister-in-law, Mrs. Lawson, lives there too. She'd be proper company for you." "I'd need time to consider," Emma said carefully. "Of course," Ryan replied. "I'm in town until tomorrow morning. The offer stands until then." He placed his hat back on his head. "Good day, Miss Evans, Mr. Paulson." With a nod to each of them, he turned and left the store, the bell jingling in his wake. Emma stared after him, her mind whirling with possibilities. Was this divine providence or simply good fortune? Either way, it seemed that Red Cloud might hold a future for her after all, just not the one she had traveled so far to claim. Over a simple lunch of bread and cheese provided by Mrs. Paulson, Emma considered her options carefully. She could try to scrape together enough money for a return ticket to Philadelphia, where she had no family, no home, and few prospects. Or she could accept Ryan Lawson's offer and build a new life in Nebraska Territory. By late afternoon, her mind was made up. Emma walked the short distance to Red Cloud's only hotel, where Mr. Paulson had informed her Ryan Lawson would be staying. She found him on the small front porch, whittling a piece of wood with a pocket knife. He stood when he saw her approach, quickly pocketing the knife and removing his hat. "Miss Evans," he greeted her. "Mr. Lawson," Emma replied. "I've considered your offer and I'd like to accept the teaching position." A smile broke across his face, transforming his stern features. "I'm glad to hear it. We can leave tomorrow morning after I finish my business in town." He hesitated, then added, "I should warn you that life at the ranch is not easy. It's isolated, the work is hard, and the comforts are few compared to what you might be accustomed to in the East." "I understand," Emma said, lifting her chin slightly. "I didn't come west expecting an easy life, Mr. Lawson." "No, I don't suppose you did," he replied, a note of respect in his voice. "Well then, Miss Evans, welcome to your new life in Nebraska Territory." The next morning dawned clear and bright, with the promise of heat later in the day. Emma had repacked her trunks and said goodbye to the kind Paulsons, who refused payment for her brief stay. "It's the neighborly thing to do," Mrs. Paulson insisted, pressing a small package of food for the journey into Emma's hands. "Besides, we're just glad you found a situation so quickly." Ryan Lawson arrived at the general store with a wagon drawn by 2 sturdy horses. He loaded Emma's trunks with ease that spoke of a lifetime of physical labor. "Ready, Miss Evans?" he asked, offering his hand to help her up to the wagon seat. Emma took a deep breath, looking one last time at the small town of Red Cloud, the place that should have been the beginning of her life as Mrs. Harold Jenkins, but was instead becoming the starting point of an entirely different journey. "Yes, Mr. Lawson, I'm ready." The journey to the Double L Ranch took most of the morning. As they traveled, the landscape opened up before Emma's eyes, vast rolling prairies stretching to the horizon, dotted with wildflowers and occasional stands of cottonwood trees. It was beautiful in its emptiness, though so different from the crowded streets and close buildings of Philadelphia that it made Emma feel small and exposed. Ryan Lawson was not much for conversation, Emma discovered. He answered her questions directly, but volunteered little information of his own. She learned that he had established his ranch 8 years earlier, after serving in the Union Army during the Civil War. He lived there with his younger brother Daniel, Daniel's wife Sarah, and a handful of ranch hands who helped manage the growing herd of cattle. "And the children I'll be teaching?" Emma asked. "4 are my brother's ages 6 to 12. The others are from neighboring homesteads within riding distance. Parents will bring them over 3 days a week. We've fixed up the old bunkhouse as a schoolroom." As they crested a small rise, Ryan pointed ahead. "There it is. Double L Ranch." Emma's eyes widened as she took in the sight. Nestled in a shallow valley, protected by low hills, stood a collection of buildings that formed the ranch. The main house was larger than she expected, a 2-story structure built of logs and sawn timber, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings, corrals, and what must be the converted bunkhouse stood nearby. Fields of what looked like wheat and corn stretched to one side, while cattle grazed on the rolling land beyond. "It's impressive," Emma said honestly. "You've built all this in 8 years. A hint of pride crossed Ryan's face. "Had a good start. Land was cheap after the war, and I had some savings from my service pay. The rest has been hard work." As they approached, a woman emerged from the main house, shading her eyes against the midday sun. 3 children of varying heights appeared beside her, watching the wagon with evident curiosity. Ryan pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "Sarah," he called to the woman, "this is Miss Evans, our new schoolteacher." Sarah Lawson was perhaps a few years older than Emma, with a kind face weathered by prairie winds and the work of frontier life. She approached the wagon with a warm smile. "Miss Evans, welcome to Double L. We're so pleased you've come. The children have been pestering their uncle for months about finding a teacher." Emma returned the smile, immediately warming to Sarah's friendly manner. "I'm happy to be here, Mrs. Lawson. And please call me Emma." "Then you must call me Sarah. We don't stand on ceremony much out here." She gestured to the children hovering nearby. "These are my eldest 3, Mary, Thomas, and James. The baby, Eliza, is napping inside." The children regarded Emma with a mixture of shyness and curiosity. Mary, the oldest at about 12, stepped forward with a small curtsy that spoke of attempts at proper manners despite frontier living. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Evans," she said formally. "The pleasure is mine, Mary," Emma replied, charmed by the girl's politeness. Ryan had already unloaded one of Emma's trunks. "I'll bring these up to your room," he said. "Sarah will show you inside." The main house was surprisingly comfortable inside, with polished wood floors partially covered by hand-woven rugs. The front door opened directly into a large room that served as both kitchen and living area, dominated by a stone fireplace at one end and a large table that could seat at least 12 at the other. Simple but sturdy furniture filled the space: several chairs, a settee, and bookshelves that caught Emma's eye immediately. "The books were Ryan's idea," Sarah said, noting Emma's interest. "He's quite the reader, though you might not guess it to look at him." Emma found this detail intriguing. The taciturn rancher hadn't struck her as a literary man. Sarah led her upstairs to a small but pleasant room at the back of the house. A window overlooked the fields and distant hills, and the furniture consisted of a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, a small desk, and a rocking chair. "I hope this will be comfortable," Sarah said. "We haven't had many guests, but Ryan insisted on preparing a proper room for the teacher when he decided to advertise for one." "It's lovely," Emma assured her. And it was simple but clean and bright, with fresh curtains that Sarah had clearly made herself. "I'll let you get settled," Sarah said. "Supper's at 6. The washroom is at the end of the hall, and there's fresh water in the pitcher on the stand there. If you need anything, just ask." Left alone, Emma sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by how quickly her circumstances had changed. 2 days ago, she had arrived in Red Cloud expecting to meet her fiancé. Now she was 10 miles from town, preparing to teach children on a cattle ranch, living with strangers who had shown her nothing but kindness so far. Perhaps, Emma thought as she unpacked her belongings, this was where she was meant to be all along. The following days brought a flurry of activity as Emma established herself at the Double L Ranch. The converted bunkhouse that would serve as her schoolroom needed considerable work. Though Ryan had installed proper windows and a stove for winter heating, the interior was bare except for a handful of mismatched tables and benches. Emma threw herself into preparing the space, grateful for the distraction from thoughts of what might have been with Harold Jenkins. Sarah helped her clean and arrange the furniture, while Ryan and his brother Daniel constructed a proper teacher's desk and blackboard at Emma's request. "I can't promise fancy learning," Emma had told the Lawsons on her second evening at the ranch, "but I can teach reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and geography, and perhaps some natural sciences if the children show interest." "That's more education than most children get out here," Daniel Lawson had replied. He was a quieter, gentler version of his older brother, with the same storm gray eyes but a more open countenance. "We're grateful for whatever you can teach them." On the morning of her first official class, Emma dressed carefully in a simple gray skirt and white blouse, her hair neatly pinned up. She arrived at the schoolhouse early to arrange everything one final time before her pupils arrived. The sound of horses and wagon wheels outside announced the arrival of the neighboring families. By 9 o'clock, Emma found herself facing 7 children ranging in age from 6 to 14, the Lawsons 4 plus 3 from homesteads within riding distance. "Good morning," she began, trying to project confidence despite her nerves. "I am Miss Evans, and I will be your teacher. I look forward to getting to know each of you as we learn together." The children regarded her with varying degrees of interest and skepticism. The oldest, a 14-year-old boy named Peter from a neighboring farm, looked particularly doubtful. "What makes you qualified to teach us?" he asked bluntly. Before Emma could respond, Mary Lawson spoke up. "Don't be rude, Peter. Uncle Ryan wouldn't have hired her if she wasn't smart enough." Emma smiled at the girl's defense but addressed Peter directly. "That's a fair question. I completed my education at the Ladies' Seminary in Philadelphia, where I studied literature, mathematics, history, and sciences. I've also taught Sunday school for 4 years. But more importantly, I love learning, and I hope to share that love with all of you." She held Peter's gaze until he gave a slight nod, apparently satisfied for the moment. "Now," Emma continued, picking up a slate, "let's see what you already know so I can determine where we should begin." By midday, Emma had assessed her pupils' varying levels of education. Some, like Mary, had clearly been taught regularly by their parents and could read and calculate quite well. Others, like the youngest Lawson child, Eliza, knew only the basics of letters and numbers. As the children ate their packed lunches outside under the shade of a large cottonwood tree, Emma made notes about what materials and books she would need. She was so absorbed in her planning that she didn't notice Ryan Lawson approach until his shadow fell across her desk. "How is it going?" he asked. Emma looked up, startled. "Oh, Mr. Lawson, it's going well, I think. Your nieces and nephews are bright children, and the others also promising, though I'll need more books and materials if I'm to teach them properly. Perhaps next time you go to town." Ryan nodded. "Make a list. I'll see what can be ordered from Omaha if it's not available in Red Cloud." Emma thanked him, then hesitated before adding, "I noticed you have quite a collection of books in the house. Might I borrow some for the older children to read?" A slight smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Of course, help yourself, though some might not be appropriate for young minds." "I'll be discerning," Emma assured him. She couldn't help adding, "Sarah mentioned you're quite the reader. I wouldn't have guessed." Ryan's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "There's a lot of hours in winter with nothing to do but read, and a man should try to improve his mind even out here." "I didn't mean to imply otherwise," Emma said quickly. I'm sorry if I offended you." Ryan's face softened slightly. "No offense taken, Miss Evans. I'm well aware I don't present as a literary man." He glanced toward the children playing under the tree. "They like you. That's good. We need some stability for them out here." Before Emma could respond, he turned and walked away, his long strides carrying him quickly back toward the main house. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable pattern. Emma taught classes 3 days a week, spending the other days helping Sarah with household tasks and preparing lessons. The children proved eager students for the most part, and Emma found herself enjoying the challenge of adapting her teaching to their various needs and abilities. Life at the Double L was demanding but satisfying. Emma rose before dawn with the rest of the household, ate breakfast with the family, and worked until after sundown most days. Unlike in Philadelphia, where social calls and formal gatherings had structured her time, here the rhythm of life was dictated by necessity. Animals needed tending, food needed preparing, clothes needed washing, regardless of the day of the week or the weather. Emma observed the Lawson brothers with growing interest. Daniel was open and friendly, quick to laugh and share stories of their childhood in Illinois. Ryan remained more reserved, though Emma occasionally caught glimpses of a different man beneath his stern exterior when he patiently taught young James how to ride, or when he discussed books with her during the rare quiet evenings when he wasn't working. One evening in late September, about a month after Emma's arrival, she found herself alone on the front porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie in hues of gold and crimson. The air had turned cooler, hinting at the approach of autumn. The sound of boots on the porch steps announced Ryan's presence before she saw him. He stopped when he noticed her, as if considering whether to join her or return to the house. "Please, don't leave on my account," Emma said quickly. "There's plenty of room." Ryan nodded and moved to stand at the porch railing, his back to her as he gazed out at the land. For several minutes, they remained in companionable silence, watching as the sun sank below the horizon. "It's beautiful," Emma said softly. "I never saw sunsets like this in Philadelphia." "One of the reasons I stayed out here after the war," Ryan replied, his voice equally quiet. "Felt like I could breathe again with all this space." Emma studied his profile, noting the tension in his jaw that seemed ever present. "Was it very bad? The war, I mean." Ryan was silent for so long that Emma thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "Yes, it was bad. Saw things no man should see. Did things I'm not proud of." He turned slightly toward her. "Is that why you came west? To escape something?" The directness of his question surprised Emma. "Not to escape exactly, more to find something." She hesitated, then decided on honesty. "My parents died 3 years ago, influenza. I was teaching at the school I had attended and living with a distant cousin who made it clear I was a burden. When I saw Mr. Jenkins' advertisement for a bride." She shrugged slightly. "It seemed like a chance for a home of my own, a family perhaps." "I'm sorry about Jenkins," Ryan said. "He was a decent man, would have treated you well, I think." "Did you know him well?" "Not well. We did business occasionally. He bought some cattle from me last spring." Emma nodded, appreciating his candor. "May I ask you something personal, Mr. Lawson?" Ryan raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Why haven't you married? A successful rancher like yourself must have had opportunities." A shadow crossed his face. "I was engaged. Before the war, she didn't wait for me. I'm sorry," Emma said, genuine sympathy in her voice. "That must have been painful." Ryan's mouth twisted in a wry smile. "It was a long time ago, and perhaps for the best. I came back from the war a different man than the one who left. Wouldn't have been fair to her." Before Emma could respond, Sarah called from inside that supper was ready. The moment of connection between them dissolved as they turned toward the house. Yet something had shifted, Emma realized as she followed Ryan inside. For the first time, she had glimpsed the man behind the stern rancher's facade, a man with his own disappointments and regrets, his own quiet strength. October brought cooler temperatures and the harvest. School sessions were suspended for 2 weeks as everyone including Emma pitched in to bring in the crops. Emma had never worked so hard physically in her life. Her hands blistered and then calloused from hours of cutting wheat and shucking corn. Her back ached from bending and lifting. Yet she found unexpected satisfaction in the work, in seeing the tangible results of their collective labor. She also found herself working alongside Ryan more frequently. He seemed to appreciate her willingness to take on any task without complaint, and gradually, his initial reserve began to thaw. He started seeking her out during brief rest periods, bringing her water or sharing occasional observations about the land or the weather. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of harvesting, Emma stepped outside for a moment of solitude. Her muscles ached pleasantly from the day's labor, and the cool night air felt refreshing against her skin. "You should be proud," Ryan's voice came from the darkness. He was seated on the porch steps, smoking a pipe, the embers glowing orange in the darkness. Emma startled slightly. "I didn't see you there." "Sorry," he said, though he didn't sound particularly apologetic. "You should be proud," he repeated. "Not many Eastern ladies would work as you have these past weeks." Emma settled herself on the step beside him, too tired to stand on ceremony. "I'm learning that I'm capable of more than I realized." Ryan turned to look at her, the faint moonlight silvering his features. "That's the West for you. Shows people what they're made of." "And what am I made of, Mr. Lawson?" Emma asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Ryan studied her for a long moment. "Something stronger than you know," he finally said, his voice low. "Something that bends but doesn't break." The intensity in his gaze made Emma's breath catch. For a heartbeat, she thought he might say more, might even reach for her hand where it rested on the rough wooden step between them. Instead, he cleared his throat and knocked the ashes from his pipe. "It's getting late. We've another long day tomorrow." "Yes, of course," Emma said, trying to hide her disappointment. "Good night, Mr. Lawson." As she rose to go inside, Ryan's voice stopped her. "Miss Evans?" "Yes, you can call me Ryan, when it's just us. Seems foolish to stand on formality after working side by side in the fields." Emma smiled in the darkness. "Then you must call me Emma." "Emma," he repeated, as if testing the sound of her name on his tongue. "Good night, Emma." "Good night, Ryan," she replied, the simple exchange of names feeling strangely intimate in the quiet Nebraska night. By mid-October, the harvest was complete, and Emma resumed her teaching duties. The schoolhouse felt cozier now, with a fire crackling in the stove against the autumn chill. The children had returned with renewed enthusiasm for learning after their break, and Emma found herself enjoying the rhythm of their days together. On a particularly fine Saturday, Emma decided to explore more of the ranch's surroundings. She packed a simple lunch, borrowed a gentle mare named Daisy from the stable with Ryan's permission, and set off to discover what lay beyond the immediate boundaries of the Double L. She rode for nearly an hour, following a small creek that wound through the grasslands. The prairie had begun to change color with the season, the greens giving way to golds and russets. Here and there, late wildflowers still bloomed, adding dots of purple and yellow to the landscape. Emma was so entranced by the beauty around her that she paid little attention to how far she had traveled or in what direction. It wasn't until the sky began to darken unexpectedly that she realized her mistake. Looking up, she saw heavy clouds gathering, much darker and more ominous than the scattered white puffs that had dotted the sky when she left. The wind had picked up too, carrying a damp chill that hadn't been present earlier. Emma turned Daisy back in what she hoped was the direction of the ranch, but the rolling landscape looked different from this angle, and she wasn't entirely sure which way to go. The mare seemed uncertain as well, shifting nervously beneath her. The first drops of rain began to fall as Emma crested a small rise, hoping to see the ranch buildings in the distance. Instead, all she could see was empty prairie in every direction. The rain intensified quickly, driven by gusting wind that cut through her light jacket. Panic began to rise in her chest. She was lost. A storm was bearing down, and night would fall in a few hours. Emma tried to remember what Sarah had told her about sudden prairie storms. They could be violent but usually passed quickly. The danger was in being caught far from shelter when they hit. She urged Daisy forward, hoping the horse's instincts might lead them home. The rain was falling in sheets now, soaking through Emma's clothes and making it difficult to see more than a few yards ahead. Thunder cracked overhead, causing Daisy to shy nervously. "Easy, girl," Emma murmured, trying to keep her own fear from communicating to the horse. Another flash of lightning, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder, proved too much for the frightened mare. Daisy reared suddenly, and Emma, unprepared for the violent movement, felt herself sliding from the saddle. She hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from her lungs. Before she could recover, Daisy bolted, disappearing into the curtain of rain. Emma called after her uselessly, then struggled to her feet, assessing herself for injuries. Her right ankle throbbed painfully when she put weight on it, but nothing seemed broken. She was alone, injured, and completely disoriented in the middle of a prairie storm. Fighting against rising panic, Emma tried to think logically. She needed shelter until the storm passed. Looking around desperately, she spotted what appeared to be a stand of trees in the near distance, perhaps along the same creek she had been following earlier. Trees might offer at least some protection from the rain and wind. Limping painfully, Emma made her way toward them, each step a struggle against the mud that pulled at her boots and the wind that threatened to knock her down. By the time she reached the small grove, she was shivering violently, her dress plastered to her skin. The trees offered minimal shelter, but it was better than nothing. Emma huddled against the trunk of the largest one, drawing her knees up to her chest in an attempt to conserve warmth. The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it seemed to be growing in intensity, the wind howling across the open prairie. As darkness began to fall, Emma's situation grew more desperate. No one knew exactly where she had gone. Even if they came looking, how would they find her in this weather? The temperature was dropping with the sun, and her wet clothes offered little protection against the growing chill. Determined not to give in to despair, Emma began to sing softly to herself hymns from her childhood, ballads she had learned in Philadelphia, anything to keep her mind from dwelling on her predicament. She was so focused on her singing that she almost didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats over the sound of the storm. A figure on horseback materialized out of the gloom, and Emma's heart leapt with hope and relief. As the rider drew closer, she recognized the broad shoulders and unmistakable silhouette of Ryan Lawson. "Emma," he called, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Emma Evans." "Here," she cried, struggling to her feet despite her painful ankle. "I'm here." Ryan dismounted in one fluid motion, crossing the space between them in long strides. His expression in the fading light was a mixture of relief and fury. "What in God's name were you thinking, riding out alone?" he demanded, gripping her shoulders as if to assure himself she was real. "Do you have any idea how dangerous these storms can be?" "I'm sorry," Emma said, her teeth chattering with cold. "I lost track of time and then the storm came so suddenly." Ryan's anger seemed to dissolve as he noticed her condition. "You're soaked through and freezing. Are you hurt?" "My ankle. When Daisy threw me." Ryan muttered something under his breath that Emma couldn't quite catch, then without warning, he swept her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. "What are you doing?" Emma gasped, instinctively putting her arms around his neck to steady herself. "Getting you home before you catch your death," he replied tersely. He carried her to his horse, a large black stallion that stood patiently in the rain. "Can you hold on if I put you in the saddle?" Emma nodded, too cold and frightened to argue. Ryan lifted her onto the horse, then mounted behind her in a single smooth motion. His arms came around her to take the reins, his body solid and warm against her back. "Hold on," he instructed, and then they were moving, the horse picking its way confidently through the stormy darkness. Emma leaned back against Ryan's chest, too exhausted and grateful for rescue to worry about propriety. His warmth seeped into her, and the steady beat of his heart against her back was reassuring in a way she couldn't quite articulate. "How did you find me?" she asked, having to raise her voice against the wind. "Daisy came back to the stable riderless. I knew you must be in trouble." His arms tightened slightly around her. "I've been searching for over an hour." The simple statement held a wealth of emotion that Emma could feel in the tension of his body. "Thank you," she said softly. "I was afraid no one would find me." Ryan didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was rough with some emotion Emma couldn't identify. "I will always find you, Emma. Remember that." The words sent an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with physical comfort. They rode in silence after that, Ryan guiding his horse unerringly through the storm toward home. By the time they reached the ranch, the worst of the storm had passed, though rain still fell steadily. Sarah rushed out onto the porch as they approached, her face lined with worry. "Oh, thank the Lord," she cried when she saw Emma. "Daniel's still out searching to the north. I'll send one of the hands to find him and let him know you're safe." Ryan dismounted first, then reached up to lift Emma down. Her legs buckled when she tried to stand, partly from the injured ankle and partly from exhaustion and cold. Without a word, Ryan swept her into his arms again and carried her into the house. Sarah hurried ahead, already issuing instructions to heat water for a bath and prepare hot tea. "I can walk," Emma protested weakly, embarrassed by the fuss. "Not on that ankle," Ryan replied, his tone brooking no argument. He carried her upstairs to her room where Sarah was already pouring hot water into the hip bath they used for bathing. "I'll take it from here," Sarah said firmly, giving her brother-in-law a pointed look. "You go get yourself dried off before you catch cold too." Ryan hesitated, his eyes meeting Emma's for a long moment. Something passed between them: concern, relief, and something deeper that neither was ready to name. "I'll check on you later," he said finally, setting her gently on the edge of the bed. After he left, Sarah helped Emma out of her wet clothes and into the bath. The hot water was blissful against her chilled skin, and Emma felt the tension begin to drain from her body. "You gave us all quite a scare," Sarah said as she helped wash Emma's hair. Her tone was gentle rather than accusatory. "When Daisy came back without you, I thought Ryan might lose his mind with worry." Emma looked up in surprise. "He was that concerned?" Sarah's expression softened. "I've never seen him like that. He was out the door with his rifle and on that horse of his before Daniel could even saddle up." She paused, studying Emma's face. "He cares for you, you know, more than he's cared for anyone in a very long time." Emma felt her cheeks warm, and not just from the bath. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Sarah replied with a small smile. "Just know that Ryan Lawson doesn't worry like that over just anyone." Later, dressed in her warmest nightgown and wrapped in a quilt before the fire in the main room, Emma sipped hot tea laced with honey and whiskey. Her ankle was bandaged and propped on a footstool, and though it still throbbed, Sarah assured her it was only a sprain that would heal with rest. The front door opened, bringing a gust of cool, damp air as Ryan entered. He had changed into dry clothes, but his hair was still damp from the rain. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his eyes immediately seeking Emma's. "Much better, thank you," she replied. "Sarah says my ankle is just sprained." Ryan nodded, then glanced around the room. "Where is Sarah?" She went to put the children to bed. "Daniel returned a little while ago." Ryan hesitated, then moved to sit in the chair across from her. For a few moments, he simply studied her, as if reassuring himself that she was truly safe. The intensity of his gaze made Emma's heart beat faster. "I owe you an apology," he finally said. Emma blinked in surprise. "Whatever for?" "For how I spoke to you earlier when I found you. I had no right to be angry." "You were worried," Emma said softly. "I understand." Ryan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You don't understand. When I saw Daisy come back without you with that storm rolling in—" He broke off, his jaw tightening. "I've never been so frightened in my life, not even during the worst battles of the war." The raw honesty in his voice took Emma's breath away. "Ryan, let me finish," he interrupted gently. "I need to say this." He took a deep breath. "When you first arrived in Red Cloud, when I made that foolish comment about you waiting for me, I had no idea how true those words would become. These past months, watching you adapt to life here, seeing your strength and kindness. You've become important to me, Emma. Very important." Emma felt tears prick at her eyes. "You've become important to me too," she whispered. Ryan reached across the space between them to take her hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses, but his touch was gentle. "I'm not good with words, not like in the books I read, but I want you to know that you have a place here for as long as you want it. Not just as our teacher, but as whatever you wish to be." Emma understood what he was not quite saying, that his feelings, like hers, had grown beyond mere friendship or professional respect. That something deeper had taken root between them, something with the potential to bloom into love. "I think I'd like to stay," she said, turning her hand to lace her fingers with his. "For a very long time." The smile that transformed Ryan's face made him look years younger, the stern lines of his countenance softening with hope and something very like joy. "Good," he said simply. "That's good." As winter settled over the Nebraska prairie, life at the Double L Ranch adjusted to the changing seasons. The cattle were moved to sheltered pastures closer to the ranch buildings. The last of the harvest was stored away, and preparations were made for the long, cold months ahead. Emma's ankle healed quickly, and she resumed her teaching duties with renewed enthusiasm. With winter's arrival, the neighboring children were no longer able to travel to the schoolhouse regularly. So Emma focused on the Lawson children, supplementing their formal lessons with reading aloud in the evenings and informal nature studies during brief ventures outside on milder days. Her relationship with Ryan evolved gradually, their growing affection expressed more in actions than words. He began to join her evening reading sessions with the children, sometimes taking turns reading aloud. He sought her opinion on ranch matters, and listened with genuine interest to her ideas for expanding the school curriculum in the spring. For Christmas, he presented her with a new set of books for the schoolhouse readers for different ages, a comprehensive atlas, and several volumes of poetry and classic literature. Emma was touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift, knowing he must have ordered the books specially from Omaha. "How did you know exactly what I needed?" she asked as she examined the beautiful volumes. Ryan smiled, that rare, transformative expression that Emma had come to treasure. "I pay attention," he said simply. In January, a particularly vicious blizzard descended on the region, confining everyone to the house for nearly a week. The howling wind and driving snow created snowdrifts taller than a man, and temperatures dropped so low that even the thickest blankets barely kept the chill at bay at night. On the third evening of the storm, after the children had gone to bed, the adults gathered in the main room. Daniel and Sarah sat close together on the settee, while Ryan and Emma occupied chairs near the fireplace. Outside, the wind screamed around the corners of the house, but inside, the fire crackled cheerfully, casting a warm glow over the room. "I've been thinking," Daniel said, breaking the comfortable silence. "With spring, we should consider expanding the wheat fields. The railroad's pushing further west each year, Gonna be easier to get grain to market soon. Makes sense, Ryan agreed. Though we'll need more hands for planting. The conversation turned to plans for the coming year: crops to plant, cattle to breed, improvements to make to the ranch buildings. Emma listened with interest, occasionally offering suggestions that the brothers considered seriously. "What about you, Emma?" Sarah asked during a lull in the conversation. "What are your plans for the school come spring?" "I'd like to organize a proper graduation ceremony for Mary and Peter," Emma replied. "They're nearly 15 now, and both have progressed remarkably. And perhaps we could consider building a small addition to the schoolhouse for a proper library." She glanced at Ryan as she made the last suggestion, uncertain whether such an expense would be feasible. To her surprise, he was regarding her with an expression of such tenderness that it momentarily took her breath away. "I think that's an excellent idea," he said softly. Later, as the evening wound down and Sarah and Daniel retired upstairs, Emma remained by the fire, reluctant to face the chill of her bedroom just yet. Ryan stayed as well, adding another log to the flames before settling back in his chair. "You've brought so much to this place," he said after a comfortable silence. "Sometimes I can hardly remember what it was like before you came." Emma smiled. "Quieter, I imagine, with fewer books and less feminine influence." Ryan chuckled. "True enough." His expression grew more serious. "But emptier too. Less alive." The way he looked at her made Emma's heart race. Over the months they had grown closer, their feelings for each other evident to everyone at the ranch, though neither had put those feelings into words. "Ryan," Emma began hesitantly, "do you ever think about what might have happened if Harold Jenkins had been alive when I arrived in Red Cloud?" Ryan's jaw tightened slightly at the mention of Jenkins, but he answered honestly. "More often than I'd care to admit. I'd like to think our paths would have crossed somehow. That fate wouldn't have been so cruel as to keep us apart." "I believe that too," Emma said softly. "I came west seeking a husband, a home, a family. I thought I knew what that would look like." She met his gaze directly. "I had no idea it would be so much more than I ever dreamed." Ryan rose from his chair and knelt before her, taking both her hands in his. "Emma Evans," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I'm not the man you came west to marry. I'm older, harder, more scarred by life than Jenkins was. But I love you with everything I am. Would you consider becoming my wife?" Tears of joy welled in Emma's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Ryan, I would be honored to be your wife." Ryan lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a reverent kiss to her knuckles. Then, with a boldness that surprised her, he rose slightly and captured her lips with his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as Emma responded with all the love that had grown in her heart over the months since her arrival. When they finally drew apart, both slightly breathless, Ryan smiled that rare, full smile that transformed his entire face. "You know," he said, "when I told you that you'd been waiting for me that day in Red Cloud, I had no idea how right I was." Emma laughed softly. "Perhaps we were both waiting without knowing it." Spring arrived on the Nebraska prairie in a riot of wildflowers and fresh green grass. The wedding of Ryan Lawson and Emma Evans was scheduled for the first weekend in May, when the land would be at its most beautiful. The ceremony took place at the Double L Ranch, with a small gathering of neighbors and friends from Red Cloud. Emma wore a simple dress of ivory silk that Sarah had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Ryan, standing tall and proud beside the minister they had brought from town, looked more handsome than Emma had ever seen him in a new black suit, his usually unruly hair neatly combed. Mr. and Mrs. Paulson attended, beaming with satisfaction at how their brief hospitality had led to such a happy outcome. Mr. Paulson leaned over to his wife during the ceremony and whispered, "Worked out better than if Jenkins had lived, I'd say." When Emma and Ryan exchanged vows, there wasn't a dry eye among the guests. The love between them was palpable, all the more powerful for having grown naturally over months of shared work, challenges, and quiet moments. "I, Ryan James Lawson, take thee, Emma Catherine Evans, to be my lawful wedded wife." Ryan's voice rang out strong and clear, though his eyes shone with emotion. "To have and to hold from this day forward for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Emma's voice trembled slightly as she repeated her vows, but her eyes never left Ryan's. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ryan drew her into an embrace that promised a lifetime of love and partnership. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful, a feast prepared by Sarah and the neighboring women, music provided by a fiddler from town, dancing on the grass beside the house until the stars came out. Emma moved from guest to guest, her happiness radiant on her face, her hand rarely leaving Ryan's. "Hard to believe you came west to marry another man," Sarah commented as she helped Emma change from her wedding dress into a simpler gown for the evening festivities. "Seems like you and Ryan were meant to find each other." Emma smiled, watching through the window as her new husband lifted young Eliza onto his shoulders, the little girl's laughter carrying up to them. "I think we were," she said softly. "I just took a rather roundabout route to get here." That night, after the guests had departed or settled into temporary sleeping arrangements around the ranch, Emma and Ryan retired to the new bedroom that had been prepared for them in what had once been a storage room on the ground floor of the house. It had been transformed with fresh paint, new curtains sewn by Sarah, and a large bed that Ryan had ordered specially from Omaha. As they stood alone together for the first time as husband and wife, Emma felt a momentary shyness descend. For all their growing closeness over the months, there were still uncharted territories between them. Ryan seemed to sense her uncertainty. He took her hands in his touch gentle and reassuring. "We have all the time in the world," he said softly. "There's no rush." Emma looked up at him, at this man who had become the center of her world. "I love you, Ryan Lawson," she said simply. "I didn't come west expecting to find you, but I'm so very glad I did." Ryan's smile was tender as he drew her close. "And I love you, Emma Lawson," he replied, her new name a caress on his lips. "You are the greatest blessing of my life." As spring turned to summer, and summer to fall, Emma found herself happier than she had ever imagined possible. Marriage to Ryan brought challenges. Of course, they were both strong-willed individuals with occasional differences of opinion, but their deep respect and love for each other always brought them back to harmony. The school continued to flourish under Emma's guidance, with more neighboring families sending their children when weather permitted. With Ryan's encouragement, Emma organized a lending library for the community, using books donated by Eastern friends she corresponded with, and others purchased with proceeds from cattle sales. In December, as the first snow blanketed the prairie, Emma shared joyful news with her husband they would be welcoming a child in the summer. Ryan's reaction was everything she could have hoped for: stunned joy followed by tender concern for her well-being. "Are you happy?" she asked as they lay together that night, his hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Ryan replied, his voice rough with emotion. "When I came back from the war, I didn't think I deserved this kind of happiness. You've proven me wrong every day since you arrived." Emma nestled closer to him, reflecting on the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. Had Harold Jenkins lived, she would have married him, never knowing what she might have found with Ryan Lawson. The thought made her hold her husband tighter. "What are you thinking?" Ryan asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "That sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected places," Emma replied. "I came west looking for one future and found something infinitely more precious." Ryan's arms tightened around her. "When I saw you that first day in Paulson's store, something told me you were meant to be here, with me." He chuckled softly. "Though I doubt saying you've been waiting for me was the most gallant introduction." Emma laughed, remembering her confusion at his strange greeting. "Perhaps not, but it turned out to be true, didn't it?" "The truest thing I've ever said," Ryan agreed, pulling her close as the winter wind sang around their home, the home they had built together on the wild Nebraska prairie. In July of 1868, exactly 1 year after Emma had first arrived in Red Cloud, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named William Daniel Lawson. As she held her son in her arms, with Ryan seated beside her on the bed, his eyes filled with wonder and love, Emma felt her life had come full circle. "He's perfect," Ryan whispered, gently touching his son's tiny hand. "He is," Emma agreed, her heart so full it might burst. "Our little miracle." As William grew, so did the Double L Ranch. Ryan and Daniel expanded their operations, adding more cattle and increasing their crop production. Emma continued to teach, bringing baby William with her to the schoolhouse, where he became the unofficial mascot, adored by all the students. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Catherine Sarah Lawson, completing their family. The Double L became known throughout the region not just for its fine cattle and crops, but for the strong family at its heart. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the day's work was done, Ryan and Emma would often sit together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie in gold and crimson. Sometimes they would speak of their hopes for the future, of the children's education, of improvements to the ranch. Other times they would sit in companionable silence, Emma's head resting on Ryan's shoulder, their hands intertwined. "You ever regret it?" Ryan asked once. "Coming west to marry a man you'd never met?" Emma considered the question seriously. "How could I regret the journey that brought me to you, to our children, to this life we've built together?" She squeezed his hand. "The path was unexpected, but the destination was perfect." Ryan lifted their joined hands to his lips. "I thank God every day that Harold Jenkins' letter found you in Philadelphia, even if it wasn't me you came to marry." Emma smiled up at the man who had become her world, the stern, reserved rancher whose heart held such depths of love and tenderness. "I may have come west for Jenkins," she said softly, "but I stayed for you. I'll always stay for you." As the years passed, Red Cloud grew from a dusty frontier outpost into a proper town. The railroad arrived in 1871, bringing increased prosperity and new settlers to the region. The Double L Ranch prospered and expanded, becoming one of the largest operations in the county. Emma's small schoolhouse grew into a proper school with multiple teachers, though she remained involved as the head teacher until William and Catherine were grown. Ryan, still reserved with strangers but warm and loving with his family, became a respected figure in the community, known for his fair dealings and sound judgment. In 1887, 20 years after Emma had first arrived in Nebraska Territory, they celebrated their anniversary with a grand party at the ranch. Friends and family gathered from miles around, including their children William, now studying law in Omaha, and Catherine, engaged to the son of a neighboring rancher. As Emma looked around at the life they had built together, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. What had begun as a desperate gamble traveling across the country to marry a stranger had led to a life richer and more fulfilling than she could ever have imagined. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Lawson," Ryan said, coming to stand beside her. At 52, his dark hair was streaked with silver, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but to Emma he was more handsome than ever. "I was just thinking about fate, Mr. Lawson," she replied with a smile. "About mail-order brides and cowboys who say the strangest things when they first meet a lady." Ryan laughed, the sound still rare enough to be precious. "Are you still holding that against me, after all these years?" "On the contrary," Emma said, leaning into his embrace. "I'm still thanking God for it, every single day." As the sun set over the Nebraska prairie, painting the land they loved in hues of gold and crimson, Ryan and Emma Lawson stood together, surrounded by the fruits of their love, their children, their home, their community. What had begun with an unexpected arrival and a presumptuous greeting had blossomed into a lifetime of love, partnership, and joy. In the end, Emma had indeed been waiting for Ryan Lawson, though neither of them had known it on that fateful day in Red Cloud. And in finding each other, they had found the greatest treasure the Wild West had to offer, not gold or land or cattle, but a love strong enough to weather any storm, tender enough to heal old wounds, and deep enough to last a lifetime.